Palace Chop House, Newark. The 23rd of October, 1935. 3 bullets. 3 men walking away thinking they'd just killed the most dangerous gangster in New York. They were wrong. Dutch Schultz didn't die that night. And what he did next wasn't just revenge. It was biblical justice that would hunt his enemies for 7 years, destroy their families, and turn the New York underworld into a living hell. This is the story of a man who rose from the dead to become the angel of vengeance. The betrayal that started it all. Dutch Schultz had enemies, but he thought Lucky Luciano was a friend. They'd worked together during Prohibition, split territories, avoided war when war would have been profitable. But friendship means nothing when there is fear involved. By 1935, Dutch had become unpredictable. He wanted to kill Thomas Dewey, the prosecutor hunting him down. The commission voted no. Dutch didn't care about votes. You kill a prosecutor, Luciano told him. Every cop in America comes for us. Dutch leaned back in his chair. So what? We've handled cops before. Not like this. This brings the federal government. This brings the army. This ends everything we've built. Dutch stood up. You are all cowards. That is when Luciano made his decision. Dutch Schultz was no longer an asset. He was a liability that could destroy them all. The order went out that same night. Murder, Inc. would handle it. Clean, professional, permanent. What Luciano didn't understand was that Dutch had been preparing for this betrayal for months. The night that should have been the end, the 23rd of October, 1935, 10:15 p.m. Charles Workman and Emanuel Weiss walked into Palace Chop House carrying death. Dutch was in the back room with his 3 most trusted men. Otto Berman, his accountant. Abe Landau, his enforcer. Bernard Lulu Rosenkrantz, his bodyguard. The attack was swift and brutal. Workman kicked in the door, 3 shotgun blasts. Berman, Landau, and Rosenkrantz went down in seconds. Weiss moved on Dutch with a .38. First bullet caught him in the chest, second in the abdomen, third in the shoulder. Dutch collapsed, blood spreading across the restaurant floor. His breathing was labored, his pulse weak. Workman checked for vitals. He is finished, let's go. They walked away, confident they'd just earned their fee from Lucky Luciano. But Dutch Schultz had learned something during his years in prison. How to survive what should kill you. For months, Dutch had been working with Dr. Samuel Rosen, a surgeon who specialized in trauma cases. Not just for medical treatment, for preparation. Dutch had trained his body to enter a state of suspended animation. Slowed breathing, controlled pulse, simulated death. He'd studied how gunshot victims died, and more importantly, how they survived. When those bullets hit him, Dutch didn't fight them. He embraced them. Let his body shut down everything non-essential. Let himself appear dead while staying alive. Dr. Rosen was waiting at Newark Hospital. The official report stated that Dutch Schultz died on the operating table at 12:03 a.m. on the 24th of October. 1935. Massive internal bleeding, beyond medical help. The death certificate was signed. The newspapers printed the obituaries, the underworld celebrated. But in a private clinic in Queens, Dutch Schultz was very much alive and planning something that would make the Old Testament look merciful. The 7 years of wrath. Dutch spent 8 months recovering, learning to walk again, building his strength, but mostly planning. He had $7 million hidden throughout New York. His insurance policy was now his war chest. But this wouldn't be ordinary revenge. Dutch had spent his recovery time reading the Bible, the Iliad, stories of legendary vengeance that spanned generations. He was going to become something new, not just a gangster seeking payback. A force of biblical justice that would pursue his enemies unto the 3rd and 4th generation. Dutch started with recruitment, but not from the usual sources. He went to churches, synagogues, men who'd lost everything to the mob, fathers whose daughters had been killed by gangsters, cops whose partners had been murdered by organized crime, men with nothing left to lose and everything to gain from seeing the mob burn. He called them the righteous. 27 men united by one purpose, the complete destruction of everyone who had betrayed Dutch Schultz. Year 1. The witnesses. Dutch began with the witnesses. Everyone who had been at Palace Chop House that night. Everyone who could identify Workman and Weiss. Everyone who might have seen something, but Dutch didn't kill them. That would be too simple instead. He blessed them. The bartender, who ducked behind the bar during the shooting, found an envelope under his door. Inside was $5,000 and a note, "For your silence and your suffering." The cook who'd heard the gunshots through the kitchen door discovered his gambling debts had been mysteriously paid off. The waitress who'd served Dutch his final meal received a scholarship fund for her daughter's college education. Within 6 months, everyone who'd witnessed Dutch's death had been transformed from potential threats into loyal protectors of his resurrection. They all understood the message: Dutch Schultz rewards loyalty and punishes betrayal. Choose wisely. Year 2. The family's Charles Workman thought he was safe in Brooklyn. He'd bought a nice house, married his girlfriend, started a legitimate business. That is when the blessings began. Workman's daughter needed surgery for a childhood illness. Anonymous benefactors paid the hospital bills. His wife's brother, unemployed for months, suddenly received job offers from 3 different companies. His elderly mother, struggling with rent, discovered her landlord had forgiven all her debts. For 6 months, Workman's family received miracle after miracle, until Workman understood who his secret benefactor was. Dutch appeared to him in a diner on Flatbush Avenue, just walked in, sat down across from him, and smiled. "Hello, Charlie. How is the family?" Workman's hands were shaking. "Dutch, I thought. Everyone said you were. Dead I was. You killed me, but God raised me up for a purpose." Dutch leaned forward. "Your family has been blessed because of my mercy, but mercy has conditions." He slid a photograph across the table. Emanuel Weiss eating dinner with his wife and children. "You are going to bring Mendy to me, not because I am threatening your family, because I've been so good to them, because they deserve to keep receiving my blessings." Workman looked at the photo, then at Dutch. "And if I refuse?" Dutch smiled. "Then you'll learn the difference between my mercy and my justice." Year 3. The hunter's Emanuel Mendy Weiss had been more careful. After the Palace Chop House job, he'd changed his name, moved to Philadelphia, tried to disappear into legitimate business, but Dutch found him, not through violence or threats, through kindness. Weiss's new business, a small restaurant, began receiving customers. Lots of customers. Well-dressed people who paid their bills, tipped generously, and never caused trouble. Within months, Weiss was making more money than he'd ever made as a killer. That is when Dutch walked into the restaurant during the dinner rush. Weiss saw him through the kitchen window and nearly collapsed. The dead man was sitting at table 7, calmly reading a newspaper and eating the daily special. When the restaurant closed that night, Dutch was the last customer. He walked into the kitchen where Weiss was cleaning up. "Beautiful place, Mendy. You should be proud." Weiss couldn't speak, couldn't move. "I've been sending you customers," Dutch continued. "Good people, loyal people, people who appreciate quality and pay their bills. Your restaurant is thriving because I blessed it." Dutch picked up a kitchen knife, examined it thoughtfully. "But blessings can be withdrawn." He set the knife down gently. "You killed me, Mendy, but I forgave you. I even helped you build a new life. All I ask in return is a small favor." Dutch pulled out a piece of paper with an address written on it. "Lucky Luciano, he is the one who gave the order. He is the one who really killed me. Bring him to this address tomorrow night, and your blessings continue. Refuse." Dutch didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Year 4, the commission Lucky Luciano had spent 3 years looking over his shoulder. Dutch's death had been too clean, too convenient. And then strange things started happening. Members of the commission began receiving gifts, anonymous deliveries of expensive wine, cash bonuses for their workers, improvements to their businesses that they hadn't ordered but somehow appeared overnight. At first, they thought it was tribute from grateful associates. Then they realized the pattern. Every gift came with a note, from a friend who remembers everything. The handwriting was unmistakable. Dutch Schultz, Frank Costello, called an emergency commission meeting. All 5 family heads gathered in a warehouse in Brooklyn. "Gentlemen," Costello announced, "we have a ghost problem." He placed a stack of photographs on the table. Surveillance shots of each commission member coming and going from their homes, their businesses, their secret meetings. And in the corner of every photograph, barely visible, was the same figure, a man in a fedora and overcoat. Simone has been watching us for months, Costello said. Someone with resources, patience, and very specific knowledge of our operations. Albert Anastasia leaned forward. You think it is Dutch? I think, Costello said carefully, that we made a mistake 3 years ago. That is when the lights went out. In the darkness, they heard a voice. Calm, familiar, terrifying. You made more than a mistake. You made a sin. Emergency lighting flickered on. Dutch Schultz stood at the far end of the warehouse. Alone, hands empty. Hello, gentlemen, miss me? 5 of the most powerful men in America reached for their guns. None of them drew. Because surrounding the warehouse, visible through the windows, were dozens of armed men. Men they didn't recognize. Men who weren't part of any family they knew. Who are they? Luciano demanded. Dutch smiled. The righteous men you've wronged, families you've destroyed. People who've been waiting years for justice. He walked closer. You see, Charlie, when you killed me, you thought you were ending a problem. Instead, you were starting something bigger, something biblical. Dutch stopped 10 feet from the commission table. For 4 years, I've been building an army, not of criminals, of victims. People who want to see the wicked punished. He gestured toward the windows. There are 200 of them out there. Fathers whose children you killed, businessmen you robbed, cops whose partners you murdered. They don't want money, Charlie. They want justice. Year 5. The plague. What happened next was unprecedented in the history of organized crime. Dutch didn't destroy the commission through violence. He did it through exposure. Every secret the mob had kept for decades suddenly became public knowledge. Newspaper reporters received anonymous tips about corruption. FBI agents found evidence on their desks. Prosecutors discovered witnesses willing to testify. It was as if a plague of truth had descended on the underworld. Bank records showing political bribes, photographs of police captains counting mob money, audio recordings of judges taking orders from crime bosses. Within months, the entire structure of organized crime in New York began to collapse. Not because of gang wars or federal raids. Because of an army of righteous citizens armed with cameras, recording devices, and unshakable determination to see justice done. Lucky Luciano found himself under federal indictment for prostitution. Frank Costello faced tax evasion charges. Albert Anastasia was wanted for murder. And through it all, Dutch remained invisible. A ghost directing an army of avenging angels. Year 6. The Reckoning. By 1941, the New York mob was in ruins. The commission had been scattered. Half their leaders were in prison or exile. Their operations had been exposed, their political protection destroyed. Lucky Luciano, facing life in prison, agreed to cooperate with the government in exchange for a reduced sentence. That is when Dutch finally revealed himself. Luciano was being transferred from his cell to the courthouse when his transport was stopped by federal agents. Real agents, with real badges and real authority. Mr. Luciano, you have a visitor. They brought him to a secure room in the federal courthouse. Dutch Schultz was waiting, dressed in an expensive suit, looking healthier than he had in years. Hello, Charlie. Luciano stared at the man he'd ordered killed 6 years earlier. This is impossible. Dutch smiled. With God, all things are possible. That is from the Bible. Charlie book, you should read before you meet your maker. He opened a folder on the table. Your cooperation with the government has been noted. Your testimony will help convict dozens of your former associates, men who trusted you, men who considered you family. Dutch closed the folder. Do you know what the Bible says about betrayers, Charlie? About men who turn against their own? Luciano said nothing. It says they shall be cast into outer darkness, where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. Dutch stood up. You betrayed me once. Now you are betraying everyone else. That is not justice, Charlie. That is just who you are. Dutch walked toward the door, then turned back. By the way, your cooperation agreement, it was my idea. I suggested it to the prosecutors. I wanted you to live long enough to see everything you built turn to ash. He smiled. Sleep well in prison, Charlie, and remember, every night for the rest of your life, that Dutch Schultz kept his promises. Year 7, the Kingdom. By 1942. Dutch had achieved something unprecedented. He destroyed the most powerful criminal organization in America without firing a shot. More importantly, he'd replaced it with something better. The neighborhoods that had been controlled by the mob were now protected by the righteous Dutch's army of reformed citizens. Crime rates plummeted, corruption disappeared. Children could walk the streets safely. Dutch had become something more than a gangster. He'd become a biblical patriarch, ruling through justice instead of fear. And he did it all from the shadows. A ghost who had risen from the dead to bring divine justice to a corrupt world. The legacy of the resurrection Dutch Schultz officially died in 1968. Though some say he simply chose to disappear again. He was 67 years old and had spent the last 30 years of his life as a legend. The organization he built, the Righteous, continued to operate long after his death, not as a criminal enterprise, but as a force for justice in communities that had been forgotten by law enforcement. They still tell stories about Dutch in the neighborhoods of New York, not as a gangster, but as something more. A man who proved that justice delayed is not justice denied, that the wicked will be punished and the righteous will inherit the earth. They shot him 3 times and left him for dead. But Dutch Schultz rose again, and his revenge was biblical.